My father-in-law thought he was breaking into the home of a broken, defenseless widow. He thought he could corner me in the dead of night, force me to sign away my late husband's property, and terrorize me into silence. What he did not know, what my husband and I had deliberately chosen to keep completely hidden from his toxic family for over a decade, was that before I ever settled into a quiet civilian life, I spent 18 years serving as an elite tactical operator and close-quarters combatives instructor in military special operations. When the heavy deadbolt shattered at 2 in the morning and he stepped into my darkened hallway expecting tears and begging, he did not find a helpless victim. He walked straight into a trained operator in total control of the battle space. Follow my story to the very end, and please drop a comment with the city or country you are watching from today, so I can see how far this journey travels. My name is Maya Sterling. I am 42 years old, and 4 months ago, my entire world was ripped apart when my husband Thomas passed away in an unexpected car accident during a heavy mountain rainstorm. Thomas was my anchor, my best friend, and the only person in the world who truly understood both sides of my life. To the outside world, including his arrogant, status-obsessed family, I was simply a quiet, mild-mannered woman who worked from home restoring antique architectural blueprints and tending to our 12-acre woodland property. What Thomas's family never knew was my previous life. Straight out of college, I had enlisted and spent nearly 2 decades in specialized military intelligence and tactical units, deploying to high-risk environments across 3 continents, and eventually training personnel in hand-to-hand combat and threat neutralization. When I retired from service and married Thomas, I wanted nothing more than peace. Thomas knew everything about my background and loved me fiercely for who I was, but we mutually agreed to keep my military career private from his relatives. His family was superficial, loud, and constantly looking for status symbols, and neither Thomas nor I had any interest in turning my past into casual dinner table gossip. The tragedy was that peace vanished the moment Thomas was laid to rest. The flowers on his memorial were barely beginning to wilt when his father, Richard Sterling, began making predatory moves to seize everything Thomas had built. Richard was a 68-year-old former commercial contractor who had spent his entire life bullying people with loud intimidation, bluster, and emotional manipulation. He saw my quiet, dignified grief not as strength, but as absolute weakness. In his mind, I was an isolated, fragile woman ripe for exploitation, and he wasted no time launching a campaign to strip me of our home. The initial confrontation came just 5 days after the funeral. Richard showed up at my front door unannounced, flanked by his younger son Bradley. Bradley was 32, an arrogant, entitled man who hid his complete lack of work ethic behind designer suits and his father's loud voice. They did not come to offer condolences, ask how I was coping, or bring a hot meal. They stepped across my threshold without waiting for an invitation, holding leather binders and acting as if they already owned the ground beneath their feet. Richard paced across my living room, running his fingers over the custom cedar mantelpiece Thomas and I had built together. "Maya," he began in that patronizing, dismissive tone he had used with me for 10 years, "we need to handle the reality of this estate. Thomas was a Sterling, and this land originally belonged to our broader family heritage. It is entirely inappropriate for an outsider with no children to occupy a 4-bedroom timber home on 12 acres. Bradley and I have prepared the legal conveyance documents to transfer the title back to the family trust where it belongs." I stood beside the hallway entrance, my back straight, my hands resting loosely at my sides in the neutral ready stance that 18 years of tactical training had made second nature. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of emotion. "Thomas and I purchased this parcel of land with our own savings, Richard. We designed this home together, and the mortgage was paid off in full 3 years ago. The deed is in my name, and this is my home." Bradley let out a sharp, mocking scoff, stepping forward to close the distance between us. Don't be naive, Maya. You're a lonely widow with an insignificant hobby business. You cannot maintain this property alone, and you certainly don't deserve to hoard Thomas's wealth. We're giving you 72 hours to pack your clothes and vacate. If you refuse, our attorneys will drag you through probate court until you don't have a single penny left to your name. Richard leaned down, trying to use his height and broad frame to tower over me, completely oblivious to the fact that I had neutralized armed hostiles twice his size in complete darkness. "Consider this your only polite warning, Maya," he whispered with a sneer. "Sign the papers, or we will remove you ourselves." The following afternoon, I met with my estate attorney in town. She reviewed every document and confirmed what I already knew with absolute certainty. Our property titles, living trusts, and deeds were ironclad. Everything had been structured with complete survivorship rights. Richard had zero legal standing, no claim to the estate, and no authority to contest the title. But having spent years studying human behavior under pressure, I understood how desperate, narcissistic men operated. When bullies discover that the law will not bend to their demands, they inevitably resort to force. Richard believed I was terrified, cowering alone inside a dark house in the middle of the woods. He had no idea he was walking into a calculated perimeter. Over the next 48 hours, I did not waste time weeping or panicking. Instead, I quietly reinforced the security of my home. I checked the hidden infrared perimeter cameras surrounding the property, verified the battery backups on the night vision recording system, and prepared non-lethal tactical restraints in strategic locations. If Richard and Bradley chose to test the boundaries of my home, they would discover firsthand what kind of woman they were dealing with. The clock on my bedside table read precisely 2:15 in the morning when the initial sound broke the stillness of the night. It was not the natural settling of cedar beams or the wind rustling through the pines. It was the sharp, metallic crunch of a pry bar forcing against the reinforced frame of the rear sunroom door, followed by the muffled pop of safety glass being scored and pushed inward. For an untrained civilian, a sudden home invasion in the dead of night triggers an immediate spike in cortisol, a racing heart, shallow breaths, and overwhelming terror. But after 18 years in tactical operations, my nervous system did the exact opposite. My heart rate slowed to a calm, icy rhythm. My senses expanded with total situational awareness. I slipped out from under the covers without making a sound, dressed in black tactical utility clothing, moving barefoot across the hardwood with practiced silence. I did not reach for a firearm because I did not need one. My home was my terrain, and in the pitch black, I held every conceivable advantage. From the shadow of the upper mezzanine, I observed two narrow flashlight beams cutting through the dark living room below. The beams danced nervously across the walls and furniture, reflecting the unsteady, agitated movements of two men who were completely out of their depth. "Keep your voice down," Richard's harsh whisper rasped through the dark. "She's sound asleep upstairs, drowning in her own self-pity. Check the filing cabinets in the study behind the desk. The original property abstracts and deed papers are in the fireproof safe. We get her signature on the transfer affidavits tonight, or we don't leave this house." Bradley's voice carried an anxious tremor, his flashlight beam shaking against the floorboards. "What if she wakes up and starts screaming, 'Dad'? What if she calls the police?" "She won't call anyone," Richard snapped back with vicious arrogance. "She's weak, soft, and terrified of her own shadow. Once she sees a knife and realizes we are not playing games, she will sign whatever we put in front of her just to save her pathetic skin." I melted into the shadows behind the cedar support pillar near the entrance of the study, allowing them to advance deeper into the center of the room. They believed they were cornering an unarmed, weeping widow in the dark. They had no idea they had stepped straight into an ambush. Bradley moved ahead, his flashlight sweeping across the desk. I closed the distance between us in 3 silent, fluid steps, moving so soundlessly that the air did not even shift. Before Bradley could register a presence behind him, I struck. In one seamless movement, my left hand clamped around his wrist, torquing the joint downward to dislodge the flashlight, while my right palm drove upward into his sternum, sweeping his lead leg out from beneath him. Bradley hit the hardwood with a heavy, breathless thud, all the air exploding from his lungs. Before he could cry out, I applied precise pressure to the nerve bundle behind his shoulder blade, pinning him instantly to the floor. Richard spun around in pure shock, his flashlight beam slicing wildly through the darkness until the light illuminated my face. His jaw dropped, his eyes bulging in sheer disbelief. The meek, grieving woman he had mocked was gone. Standing over his pinned son was a battle-ready operator, completely still, perfectly balanced, and radiating lethal authority. "Take one step, Richard, and you will be on the floor beside him," I said in a calm, quiet voice that carried the terrifying weight of absolute certainty. Richard froze, his hands shaking so violently that the flashlight beam rattled against the ceiling. "Maya? What is this? What are you doing?" he stammered, his booming arrogance instantly replaced by pure, stammering panic. Without breaking eye contact, I reached into my tactical pocket and produced heavy-duty nylon flex cuffs. Within 30 seconds, using standard field containment protocols, I had Bradley immobilized face down on the rug and Richard secured firmly to the central timber pillar of the room. Neither of them had suffered severe physical injury, but both were completely neutralized, unable to move an inch. I walked over to the wall and flipped the switch, flooding the grand room with warm overhead light. Richard blinked frantically against the brightness, sweat pouring down his pale face, his chest heaving with terror. Bradley lay whimpering softly on the rug, his expensive suit wrinkled, his bravado entirely crushed. I pulled up a sturdy wooden armchair, sat down calmly directly in front of Richard, pulled my smartphone from my pocket, and tapped the audio record button. I placed the phone flat on the coffee table between us. "Now, Richard," I said in a flat, conversational tone, "a violent home invasion at 2 o'clock in the morning is not about family heritage. You are desperate. Tell me the real truth." Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the glowing red recording icon on the screen. "Maya, please, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We were just trying to protect Thomas's interests. Let us go and we can forget all about this." "You smashed through my door with a pry bar, Richard," I replied coldly, "and you will sit right there until I have every detail. Why did you need this house signed over tonight?" The room fell into heavy, suffocating silence for 10 agonizing seconds. Richard looked down at his restrained hands, his chest trembling, as the reality of his total defeat sank in. The tough facade completely shattered, and when he finally spoke, his voice broke into a pathetic rasp. "I'm ruined, Maya," Richard whispered, tears of terror welling in his eyes. 2 years ago, Bradley and I made reckless commercial investments in an offshore development fund. We lost everything. 6 months before Thomas died, I forged Thomas's signature on a $450,000 corporate loan guarantee, using his architectural firm as collateral. Bradley groaned from the floor. "Shut up, Dad. Don't tell her." "Shut up, Bradley," Richard shouted back, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She has us. Don't you see that? The lending institution discovered the discrepancy 2 weeks ago. They scheduled a forensic audit for this coming Monday morning. If I couldn't get the deed to this property tonight, liquidate it for cash, and pay off the forged notes, the bank was turning the case over to the federal prosecutor. I was facing 20 years in prison. I sat watching them in complete silence, letting the phone capture every word, every admission of criminal fraud, forgery, extortion, and planned theft. They had not come out of grief or entitlement. They had come to destroy my life in a desperate attempt to cover up their own felonies. I picked up my phone, stopped the audio recording, and dialed 911. Within 15 minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of county sheriff cruisers illuminated the pine trees outside as 3 squad cars pulled up the gravel driveway. When the deputies entered through the front foyer with their hands on their holsters, expecting a chaotic, violent crime scene, they found a quiet, pristine home with two fully restrained intruders on the floor and a calm homeowner standing near the kitchen counter, holding her identification and deed records. "Ma'am, are you injured?" the lead sergeant asked, his eyes widening as he looked between the securely bound men and my serene posture. "I am completely unharmed, Sergeant," I replied smoothly. "These two men forced entry through my rear sunroom door at 2:15 in the morning with the intent to extort property documents. I secured them, called your dispatch immediately, and captured a full audio confession on my phone." Richard immediately attempted to shout, his voice shrill and desperate. "Officer, arrest her! She assaulted us! We are family! We had permission to be here!" The sergeant looked from Richard's frantic, sweating face to the shattered glass and crowbar marks by the sunroom entrance, raising an eyebrow in clear disbelief. "Breaking deadbolts with a crowbar in the middle of the night is not a family visit, sir." I handed my phone to the secondary deputy, playing the crystal-clear audio recording where Richard explicitly confessed to the break-in, the attempted coercion, and the $450,000 banking fraud. I also pulled up the high-definition security footage on my tablet, showing the entire intrusion from the moment they stepped onto my porch. The deputies did not hesitate. They cut the zip ties only to snap heavy steel handcuffs onto both Richard and Bradley, reading them their Miranda rights as they marched them out into the cold night air. Richard looked back over his shoulder one final time, his eyes wide with profound shock and horror as he finally understood the true capability of the woman he had tried to intimidate. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded with ruthless precision. Armed with the security footage, the recorded confession, and forensic accounting records, the state prosecutor filed multiple felony charges against Richard and Bradley, including first-degree burglary, extortion, grand larceny, and bank fraud. With their crimes fully exposed, they were forced to liquidate their remaining assets to settle the fraudulent debts, and both men were subsequently sentenced to significant time in federal prison. As for me, I remained in our beautiful timber home among the pines. The memory of Thomas was fully cleared of their corrupt schemes, and the peace we had worked so hard to build was permanently secured. 18 years of military service taught me that genuine strength is never loud, boastful, or aggressive. True strength is quiet, disciplined, and unwavering in the face of injustice. Thomas would have been proud to see that our home was protected and our dignity remained untouched. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. How would you have handled a situation where family members tried to bully and intimidate you out of your rightful home? Would you have maintained your composure or taken a different approach? Let me know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Be sure to drop the city or country you are watching from, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. Until next time, stay safe and stand strong.